Hey everyone, in this video we're gonna create those tiny little lightnings that we can put 4 on the texture and just use them randomly to spawn around certain objects. I usually use those if I want something to be around a circular object or maybe projectile in my case, but you could just use them for whatever you want. And I usually put like 4 of those on one texture so I can get nice variety when I'm actually spawning those. So let me go through the controls. If I go to the beginning, I got different noise textures. So if I'll plug a different one, you can see we're getting slightly different results. And also if I go into the cross section and I just scroll this, I have a separate control for those lightnings as well. And the one here is being actually driven by another texture, but all of those 3 here are driven just with this cross section and those textures. Right, anyway, so let's start and let's create this graph from scratch. So first I'm gonna bring one of the noise textures, that will be a pedaling noise. Let me zoom in a bit. I'm gonna run it through cross section. And under cross section, I actually wanna change the drawing style to be gradient mirrored. Also, I'm gonna create this to polygonal. And then maybe segment amount, we can tweak it, and I'm just gonna give it maybe give it 10 for now. I'm gonna go here, create a slightly disorder as well, so we could get nice variety. Next, it will be a scan, histogram scan, so I can actually isolate the shape. I want this to be fairly thin, so I can distort it later on. And to do it, I'm gonna use multi-directional warp grayscale. And to distort it, I'm just gonna get maybe cells 1 texture, and I'm gonna blur it with the default settings for now. I need this to be very small scale, maybe 5. And then let's apply it. In here, I'm gonna increase the intensity and change the direction to 2, and this maybe to chain. Okay, I'm gonna change it to 50 just to see what we could get. And we are getting slight distortion on those waves. So if you wanted a bit more jagged edges, you can decrease the intensity of your blur. I'm just gonna keep it with those settings for now. Okay, next I'm gonna create another multi-directional warp grayscale. Oops. But this time, let's maybe have a different input. So I'm gonna go maybe for crystal. Crystal 1. With a small scale as well, and I'm gonna run it through a blur node with the default settings for now. I'm gonna keep the same settings, but maybe change the rotation to be maybe 90, and I'm gonna start decreasing the intensity of my blur to get even more jagged edges. And in here, I'm gonna play with the scale and with the disorder as well, just to see what could I get with the different settings. Okay. Next, I'm gonna use bevel. And for the distance, I'm going to go into minus values, just slightly. And next, histogram scan, just to isolate the shape. And contrast as well. And now we have a full control over the shape of the lightning. Next, I'm just gonna rotate it 90 degrees. I'm gonna use a trapezoid to create this tapered version of it. And I'm gonna disable tiling as well here. I'm gonna use another transform just to rotate it back to the horizontal version. And I want to get rid of the sides of it. So what I'm gonna do, I'm actually gonna blend this. And I'm gonna use tile sampler. Here, I'm gonna get a gradient linear. That one, I'm gonna add 90 rotation, and I'm gonna use histogram scan to create a mask for my texture, which I'm gonna create here with high contrast. And I'm gonna plug this into the mask input. In here, I'm gonna change the pattern to be disk with maybe some random scale, a random position as well. And I'm gonna start increasing the size. And under mask, I'm just gonna add this threshold and invert the mask. And I'm gonna use this as a subtract for my blend. And now if I'm just gonna go to this histogram scan, start increasing, you can see we can play with this mask if we need to. Next, I'm gonna use shape mapper. In here for the pattern amount, I'm just gonna go for 3. And I'm gonna start playing with some of the values here. I also wanna move this a little bit using transform. So I'm gonna get transform. And now you can see I can just move this a little bit outwards. Okay, another bit here under shape mapper is that we can actually shape it to a polygon instead of a circle. So maybe we could go for something that has got a bit more jagged, is a bit more rounded, if that's what you need. And under transform, I'm just gonna move this back towards the center. But now we can see we're getting this nice jagged edges using the polygonal shape under the shape mapper. Okay, so now we've got this. I wanna see if it actually works. So I'm gonna get the gradient, or actually before that I'm gonna warp it a little bit. So I'm gonna use just a simple warp. I'm gonna get cells with a small shape, small size here, blur as well, and plug it into the warp input or gradient input. And if I put maybe 5 here, we're getting a little bit of warp on those lightnings. So you can see here, I think this is really cool. You got like a fat line here and very thin one at the end. And we can play with the blur as well if you want a bit more warp. However, I think we're getting a bit more too much intensity, so I'm just gonna maybe put leave it at 0.5 or 0.6. And now if I go here and just distort it a little bit, we're getting nice varied edges. Okay, so I'm just gonna keep it as is. Next, I want to use a bevel, and that will be to create like a highlights on it. Histogram scan to isolate it. So we're getting those, and you can see I'm just gonna increase the contrast, and we're getting some nice highlights, and I'm gonna blend it together with the previous version. But before that, I'm gonna apply blur and blend it nicely using add a linear. And I'm gonna blend it again. I need this to be reverted. As you can see here, now we're getting like a nice transition. So we get gray values here, and then we get highlights and the bloom around it, like a tiny glow as well. Okay, so now let's try if the color might work for this. I'm gonna go for a gradient map. In here, I'm just gonna add some color. Before that, we can actually add tiny amount of blur there as well, just to blur those very harsh shapes. And we can apply the glow texture as well, just to see what we might be getting. And for the color, I'm just gonna try to match the other ones. So that will be a little bit dark bluish. Okay, so I think it could work. So I'm gonna leave this gradient and the glow here. And now what I'm gonna do, actually, I wanna isolate this. So I can pick and choose which lightings do I want. So what I'm gonna do, I'm gonna get shape. Like this. I'm gonna use shape mapper. For the pattern amount, I'm just gonna go for 1. Zero radius and 1 width. And now you can see here, I've got a mask that I can use to isolate the lightnings. So I'm gonna use blend. I'm gonna set it to multiply. And after blend, I'm just gonna blur this a little bit to get rid of the very harsh ends that we've got here. So maybe a value of 1. And now I'm just gonna plug it in here just to get how it might looks. And for the shape map, as you can see, I can just do this. And we're getting our first lighting. Next, what we could do, I'm just gonna use transform here, rotate this right there, turn off the tiling, and now I can just scale it so it fits into that top square. Okay, for the remaining lightings, what you could do, you could just copy this here and get another transform, move it down, and under shape mapper, all you have to do is just rotate it slightly. And now you have to just position that one here. You can blend those together. As you can see, you can feel those remaining two using this technique. The best part is now you can go back to the very beginning of your graph, go to the cross section, and just change this to get slightly different looking small lightnings. Also, feel free to experiment with the different noise noises as well. So for example, you could get a pedaling noise here. Let me select our lightnings. You can select the pedaling noise and get like very low scale of it here. I play with the disorder as well in order to get a slightly different look. Or you could just stretch it as well. So you could go, for example, for Voronoi. And if you want a stretched one, you can just apply it here and preview how it looks at the end. You've got this warp here as well that we've added. So feel free to experiment with those values here and with the cells. And you can create various controls for yourself here as well. And then you can just add it to your gradient if you want a color texture, but obviously it might be a good idea to fill those remaining 2 spaces. And that's how I'm getting those lightning textures. And then I'm just gonna import that into game engine and pick them randomly if I want them to appear on some objects or around some spherical object. All right, thank you so much for watching.